London, 1940, a city under siege. Bombs rain from the sky, buildings crumble, and the shadow of Nazi Germany creeps closer every night. But hidden beneath the chaos of the Blitz, another war was raging. One fought not in the skies or trenches, but in the darkened halls of secret courts. Here, behind locked doors and heavy curtains, captured Nazi spies were tried in silence. No press, no public, no mercy. Their fates were sealed in the name of national security, and for decades, the truth remained buried in classified files. Tonight, we uncover the secret British trials of Nazi spies in London, a story of betrayal, espionage, and justice carried out in the shadows. What really happened to these men? Why were their trials hidden? And what secrets still lie undiscovered in the archives? Stay with us, and before we begin, subscribe now. This is a story you won't forget. London in 1940 was a city of shadows. The Blitz had begun, and each night the population braced itself for the haunting wail of air raid sirens, followed by the thunderous roar of German bombers. Streets that once bustled with life were reduced to rubble. By day, Londoners tried to carry on as if normalcy still existed. By night, they huddled in shelters, waiting for the bombs to stop falling. Yet amid the destruction, another fear quietly gnawed at the British psyche, the fear of betrayal from within. The German Abwehr, Hitler's intelligence service, had dispatched spies across Europe with a singular mission: infiltrate, observe, and sabotage. Britain, isolated and vulnerable after the fall of France, was a prime target. MI5, Britain's domestic counterintelligence agency, knew the threat was real. The question was not if German spies had slipped into the country, but how many and how quickly they could be found. To combat this invisible enemy, MI5 expanded its Section B1A, the unit responsible for counter-espionage. It was a small, tight-knit group of officers who worked with relentless focus. Their task: identify, capture, and interrogate enemy agents before they could transmit intelligence back to Berlin. Yet the challenge was immense. The spies did not wear uniforms. They blended into the chaos of wartime Britain, hiding behind forged papers, stolen identities, and carefully memorized cover stories. The public knew nothing of this silent war. Newspapers were censored, and trials, when they happened, were concealed from the headlines. But inside MI5's unassuming headquarters on Gower Street, tension ran high. Case files piled on desks, photographs of suspects were passed between agents, and decoded radio transmissions hinted at a chilling reality. Nazi spies were already inside Britain. The first arrests came not through elaborate intelligence work, but through human error. Some spies, nervous and poorly trained, gave themselves away almost immediately. Their accents betrayed them. Their cover stories collapsed under scrutiny. At railway stations, at ports, even in the countryside, individuals posing as refugees or foreign workers aroused suspicion. British police, trained to be alert for irregularities, detained them and passed them on to MI5. But among these early captures was one case that electrified the service. A man had arrived in London, carrying not just false documents, but detailed instructions from the Abwehr. Hidden in his belongings were maps of military installations, notes on troop movements, and a crude radio transmitter. He had been sent not merely to observe, but to act. His mission: disrupt Britain's fragile war effort at its most vulnerable hour. The discovery sent shockwaves through MI5. If this spy had been caught, how many others were still out there, undetected? Each German agent represented not just stolen secrets, but potential acts of sabotage. Bridges destroyed, factories crippled, morale shattered. The war might be fought with bombs and bullets, but in the back rooms of London, it was also fought with whispers, lies, and coded messages. What to do with captured spies was a pressing question. The traditional route, public trials and long sentences, risked exposing methods and intelligence. Worse, it risked informing Berlin of which agents had been compromised. Britain needed a new solution, one that combined justice with secrecy. And so, in hushed conversations among ministers and intelligence chiefs, a radical idea emerged. Secret trials, held in private, with outcomes known only to a handful of officials. Justice would be swift, and silence would be absolute. For the men who found themselves in MI5's custody, there would be no headlines, no jury of peers, no appeal. Their fate would be decided behind closed doors, in rooms where even the light seemed reluctant to shine. And as the first captured spy sat under interrogation, staring across the table at British officers who already knew too much about him, the machinery of these secret trials began to turn. The decision had been made. Britain would fight the Nazis not only in the skies and seas, but also in the courtroom, in complete darkness. But what MI5 did not yet know was that some of these men were willing to talk, and the secrets they carried would open doors to even deeper conspiracies. The interrogation rooms of MI5 were unremarkable at first glance: plain walls, a table, 2 chairs. Yet to the men who sat across from British intelligence officers, these rooms became battlefields. Here words replaced bullets, and silence was as dangerous as a gun. Each captured Nazi agent represented both a threat and an opportunity. If broken, they could reveal the networks that had smuggled them into Britain. If they resisted, they might still die with their secrets intact. One of the first men to endure this ordeal was Dr. Karl Meyer, a German agent who had slipped into Britain under the guise of a refugee from Holland. He carried with him forged papers and a list of contacts written in invisible ink. When arrested, Meyer tried to maintain his cover, insisting he was an innocent man caught in wartime hysteria. But MI5 officers, trained in subtle manipulation, chipped away at his story piece by piece. They used patience as a weapon. Hours stretched into days, with interrogators circling back to the same questions, comparing answers, noting contradictions. The room's silence was engineered, designed to unnerve the prisoner. Every pause felt heavier, every misstep magnified. Slowly, Meyer's confidence eroded. When confronted with evidence, the hidden ink, the radio parts, his denials crumbled. At last, he admitted what MI5 already suspected. He had been sent by the Abwehr to gather intelligence on Britain's defences. But what stunned the interrogators most was not his confession, but his incompetence. Meyer had been poorly trained, his instructions vague, his equipment clumsy. It became clear that Germany's intelligence service had underestimated Britain's vigilance. Many agents sent across the Channel were little more than desperate recruits, handed false papers and told to blend in. They were doomed to fail. Still, failure did not make them harmless. Even the weakest agent could deliver valuable intelligence if left unchecked. MI5 quickly realized the danger of simply imprisoning them. Word could leak to Berlin. The Abwehr might realize their network was compromised and adjust tactics. The British advantage lay in secrecy. The less Germany knew, the easier it was for MI5 to manipulate their spy program. Thus, the strategy shifted. Captured agents were not just prisoners. They were tools. Some were turned, persuaded, through fear or promises, to feed misinformation back to Berlin under British supervision. This became the foundation of the double-cross system, one of the most effective counterintelligence operations of the war. But not all spies could be used in this way. Some were too unreliable, too fanatical, or simply too broken to trust. For these men, a different fate awaited. Public trials were out of the question. They would reveal too much, and Britain could not afford to broadcast its methods. Instead, government ministers and intelligence officials agreed. Secret proceedings would be held, trials cloaked from public view. Even Parliament knew little of what was happening in the quiet courtrooms of London. The choice was controversial, even within Whitehall. Britain prided itself on open justice, the right to a fair trial and the transparency of its courts. To abandon these principles, even in wartime, risked moral compromise. But the stakes were clear. Survival demanded silence. National security outweighed tradition. Justice would be administered, but behind closed doors. And so the stage was set for something unprecedented in modern British history: the trial of enemy spies in secret military courts. These men would stand accused not before the public, but before a handful of carefully chosen officials. Their crimes would be catalogued, their guilt determined, and their sentences, often death, carried out swiftly. With the outside world none the wiser, in the archives of MI5, records from this period carry a strange, chilling rhythm: arrest, interrogation, confession, trial, sentence, execution. Each entry reads like a shadow passing across the page, an echo of lives extinguished in silence. But the first of these secret trials would prove more complex than anyone expected. The man at its center was no ordinary spy. His case would test the very limits of Britain's new system of wartime justice and expose a dilemma that could not be solved with silence alone. The courtroom chosen for Britain's first secret wartime trial was not one of grandeur. There were no oak-paneled walls heavy with history, no crowded gallery humming with public interest. Instead, the space was stripped down, functional and silent, a room where justice was to be delivered without witnesses. Outside its locked doors, Londoners hurried through blacked-out streets, oblivious to the drama unfolding within. Inside, a handful of men carried the weight of a nation's survival on their shoulders. The accused was Johannes Schmidt, a German agent captured near the Kent coast. He had arrived under the cover of darkness by small boat, equipped with forged documents, a pistol, and a crude radio transmitter. For weeks, MI5 officers had interrogated him, peeling away his cover story until the truth emerged. Schmidt was no ordinary recruit. He had been selected for his fluency in English and his knowledge of Britain's railway system, skills meant to help him sabotage troop movements. When the trial began, Schmidt appeared calm, even defiant. He wore a borrowed suit, ill-fitting, but he carried himself with an air of certainty. Perhaps he believed that Germany's advance across Europe would make his fate irrelevant. Perhaps he trusted that Berlin would soon march into London and set him free. The proceedings were conducted under the tightest secrecy. The presiding judge was Sir Cyril Radcliffe, chosen for his sharp legal mind and absolute discretion. Military officers sat as assessors, weighing the evidence alongside him. There was no jury, no reporters scribbling notes. Only a stenographer recorded the words. The transcript itself marked top secret. The charges were read: espionage, sabotage, and treason under wartime law. The evidence was laid out with meticulous care. Documents seized from Schmidt's belongings detailed his orders from the Abwehr. His radio equipment, disassembled but unmistakable, was displayed on the table. Witnesses, drawn from MI5 officers, described his arrest and subsequent confession. Piece by piece, the facade of innocence collapsed, yet Schmidt did not falter. When asked for his defense, he claimed he was merely following orders, a soldier of Germany acting on behalf of his nation. He insisted that the trial itself was illegitimate, that only victory in war would decide who was right and who was wrong. His words hung in the air, a reminder of the moral grayness that cloaked these proceedings. For the officials in the room, the dilemma was profound. Britain had always prided itself on transparent justice, trials conducted in open court, verdicts reached by a jury of peers. Now those ideals had been set aside. Here guilt was weighed in silence, and the sentence, once delivered, would be carried out in secrecy. The very foundations of British law trembled under the pressure of necessity. Still, necessity won. The verdict was inevitable, guilty on all counts. Schmidt's face betrayed no emotion as the sentence was pronounced. Death, execution to be carried out swiftly, away from public knowledge, the details buried in classified files. But the case did not end with Schmidt. During his interrogation, he had let slip details of contacts in London, names, safe houses, and signals used by German intelligence. MI5 realized that Schmidt was not an isolated agent. He was part of a web, a network of spies operating within Britain's borders. His trial, though conducted in silence, was only the beginning of a much larger story. That night, as Schmidt was led away to await his fate, MI5 officers pored over his statements. Maps were unfolded, addresses cross-checked, surveillance teams dispatched. The secret war had just escalated. What began as a single arrest was about to unravel into a conspiracy that reached deeper into the heart of London than anyone had dared imagine. And somewhere in the city, hidden among the rubble and blackout curtains, another Nazi spy waited for his orders, unaware that the British were closing in. After Schmidt's confession, MI5's operation in London shifted into overdrive. The threads he had revealed, seemingly small details of safe houses, courier routes, and the names of associates, began to form a map of a hidden network threading through the heart of the city. Every intercepted message, every whispered tip, became a crucial puzzle piece in a game that spanned neighborhoods, train stations, and the dimly lit streets behind the Blitz's blackouts. Officers moved cautiously, aware that exposure could compromise the entire operation. Surveillance teams followed suspects across the city, often shadowing them for days, blending into the backdrop of wartime London. The hum of air raid sirens became a constant companion to their investigations. Each siren's wail was both a warning of imminent danger and an unintentional cover for secret movements. A dropped suitcase, a coded phrase in a letter, a chance encounter at a bus stop, all could reveal the hidden hand of German intelligence. But as the operation expanded, so did the moral complexity. Not all leads were reliable. Ordinary citizens, driven by fear or suspicion, reported neighbors who had done nothing wrong. MI5 officers had to distinguish genuine threats from innocent mistakes. Interrogations became more nuanced. Sometimes, subtle psychological pressure was applied, not to extract confessions, but to test loyalties. The officers walked a delicate line, protect national security without violating the very principles they were sworn to defend. The web of spies revealed a startling pattern. Safe houses were not tucked away in some distant suburb. They were embedded within the city's very core. Apartments above bakeries, rooms behind shop fronts, even cellars beneath warehouses served as hubs for coded messages and radio transmissions. The enemy had exploited Britain's dense urban environment, using it as camouflage. For the agents, London was both a battlefield and a shield. For MI5, the city had become a labyrinth of suspicion and strategy. Amid this sprawling investigation, one discovery sent a chill through the agency. Schmidt had mentioned a contact working near Whitehall, the nerve centre of Britain's government. The implications were immediate and terrifying. A spy operating steps away from the offices of ministers, military planners, and intelligence chiefs. This was no ordinary operative. This individual had access, potentially direct access, to the very decisions guiding Britain's war effort. I-5 intensified surveillance in the area, deploying officers disguised as clerks, porters, and delivery men. Every letter that passed through nearby postboxes was examined. Every visitor to government-adjacent buildings was discreetly logged. The tension was palpable. A single mistake could mean the leak of critical intelligence, endangering lives and perhaps the entire city. Yet the closer the officers got to uncovering the spy's identity, the more elusive he became. Unlike Schmidt, who had arrived unprepared and nervous, this agent moved with precision and composure. Every step was calculated, every contact carefully chosen. It was as if he anticipated British countermeasures before they were even deployed. His presence was a reminder that the war in London was not merely physical. It was a psychological chess game, a struggle for supremacy in secrecy itself. Meanwhile, within MI5, debates raged. How far could they go in manipulating the network? Could they feed misinformation back to Berlin without risking innocent lives? How much of the city's population should remain in the dark about the spy activity under their very noses? These questions were not academic. Each decision carried immediate and grave consequences. Then, one night, a seemingly innocuous discovery changed everything. A briefcase left in a shadowed alley, addressed to an office in Whitehall. Inside were coded messages, maps, and a schedule indicating that someone high in the city's security apparatus was being monitored. The spy was closer than anyone had dared imagine. MI5 officers exchanged glances, their minds racing. The realization settled over them like a fog. This was no ordinary espionage case. They were not merely hunting a saboteur, they were confronting an enemy embedded within the very heart of Britain's government. And in that moment, when truth became undeniable, the next move they made could expose the spy network entirely, or it could cost countless lives. MI5's pursuit of the Whitehall spy became an all-consuming operation. Officers worked around the clock, following every lead, scrutinizing every visitor, and intercepting communications before they could leave the city. The tension in the agency was palpable. Every knock at the door, every coded radio transmission, carried the potential to ignite a crisis that could cost countless lives. The city outside carried on as if oblivious, unaware that the fate of its government and military plans rested on unseen battles waged in quiet rooms and shadowed streets. The closer MI5 came to their target, the more dangerous the game became. The spy, meticulous and cunning, left no trace, no fingerprints, no loose ends. It was as if he existed solely to evade detection, a ghost among the living. Officers pored over Schmidt's earlier confessions and the network maps he had revealed, cross-referencing every name, every address. Yet the network was deeper and more insidious than anyone had imagined. Safe houses led to other safe houses. Couriers were doubles or sometimes triple agents. Even messages that seemed innocuous were laced with layers of deception. Days turned into weeks. MI5's teams conducted surveillance in shifts, working under the constant strain of knowing that one misstep could jeopardize everything. And then finally the breakthrough came. A minor clerk, unassuming and overlooked, had been carrying messages under the nose of Whitehall officials. The documents revealed meeting points, safe house locations, and instructions from Berlin. It was a moment of grim triumph. The spy network had a vulnerable link, and MI5 could finally begin to unravel it. Yet this victory was immediately complicated by betrayal. Evidence suggested that someone within Britain's own government, a high-ranking official, may have been compromised. The possibility was shocking and terrifying. Could one of their own be feeding information to the enemy? MI5 had always operated with absolute secrecy, but the notion that the leak came from inside Whitehall forced them to question everything. Trust became a luxury they could no longer afford. Every official, every aide, every clerk was now a potential threat. The stakes could not have been higher. Operation plans for defending London, troop movements, and supply logistics were now potentially exposed. The enemy could strike with knowledge they should never have had. MI5 officers worked with clinical precision, coordinating arrests, closing safe houses, and intercepting transmissions. They monitored meetings, tapped phones, and followed couriers through the labyrinthine streets of wartime London. Each day brought new revelations, and each revelation brought new danger. In the midst of this, the moral weight of their actions pressed heavily on the officers. Some spies, caught and desperate, revealed only partial truths. Others were willing to cooperate fully, but the lines between loyalty, coercion, and survival blurred. MI5 had to decide, again and again, who could be turned, who could be used, and who must be eliminated. Every choice carried consequences that could ripple far beyond the walls of the agency. As the network began to collapse, one final piece of evidence arrived, a coded message indicating a meeting of key operatives, scheduled in a central London building just hours away. This was the moment MI5 had been preparing for, the opportunity to strike decisively and dismantle the core of the spy network. But the revelation also brought a chilling realization. The compromised official might attend, and if so, the British government's darkest secret could be exposed in a single night. The officers exchanged tense glances. The trap had to be set perfectly. Any misstep, any hint of knowledge could alert the enemy and lead to disaster. The city teetered unknowingly on the edge of a hidden abyss. As MI5 prepared to confront the network, they had spent months unraveling, and in the shadows, the spies themselves moved toward the meeting, unaware that the walls were closing in, unaware that the final confrontation, one that could expose loyalty, betrayal, and the very heart of Britain's wartime security, was about to begin. The night of the final operation was thick with tension. London had quieted under the Blitz's blackout, its streets empty but for the occasional wail of distant air raid sirens. Inside MI5's headquarters, officers moved with silent urgency, coordinating every detail of the trap that would finally dismantle the spy network. Months of painstaking investigation had led to this moment, the culmination of arrests, interrogations, and secret trials. Yet the outcome was anything but certain. One misstep could undo all they had worked for and expose the heart of Britain's wartime security. The central London building, a nondescript office block, was where the key operatives were to meet. MI5 had identified them through coded messages, informants, and painstaking observation. Every window was shadowed, every entrance watched. Officers in civilian clothes positioned themselves strategically, ready to intercept at a moment's notice. Inside, the spies moved as if they were alone, unaware that the walls themselves now conspired against them. Among them was the agent whose presence had terrified MI5 from the beginning, the man operating close to Whitehall. He was precise, calm, a professional trained to remain invisible even under scrutiny. But even his skill could not withstand the intricate net that MI5 had woven over months. As the meeting began, officers silently communicated via hidden earpieces and signals. The trap was set. Then came the most shocking revelation. One of the spies had maintained direct contact with a high-ranking British official, someone deeply embedded in the administration. The evidence, obtained from intercepted correspondence and careful cross-referencing of movements, left MI5 stunned. The betrayal was not only a strategic threat, but a profound moral crisis. How could someone entrusted with the nation's defense feed intelligence to its enemies? The officers steeled themselves. Duty demanded action, but the implications were devastating. The arrests commenced with ruthless efficiency. Officers swooped through the building, seizing the spies before they could react. There were moments of chaos, shouts, scuffles, and the sharp click of handcuffs. Yet, in all of this, the compromised official remained elusive, moving under the guise of legitimate authority. MI5 had to decide whether to expose him publicly or contain the situation quietly. History demanded secrecy, but justice demanded reckoning. In the aftermath, the spies were brought to the hidden courts that had been prepared for precisely this purpose. These proceedings, entirely sealed from public knowledge, were swift but deliberate. Evidence was presented, confessions recorded, and sentences pronounced. Some were to be imprisoned. Some, guilty of the most egregious acts, were sentenced to execution. The room was silent, save for the scribes recording every word, every decision, in meticulous detail. Outside, London continued unaware, the war above ground raging, oblivious to the shadowed justice taking place beneath its very feet. The moral weight of the secret trials pressed heavily on the MI5 officers. They had acted to protect millions, yet in doing so had operated outside the normal bounds of justice. Each decision, each sentence, carried an emotional toll that could not be shared. The officers understood the paradox of their duty. To save a nation, they had to sacrifice the transparency that defined it. It was a burden they would carry long after the trials ended. As the last of the spies were processed, MI5 turned its attention to the high-ranking official. Evidence was irrefutable. Communications with Berlin, meetings with the spies, and subtle manipulations designed to leak intelligence. Yet bringing him to justice publicly risked demoralizing the government and compromising ongoing operations. The decision was made to remove him quietly, to contain the threat while preserving the integrity of wartime administration. Even in this, the lines between justice and expediency blurred. The city, unknowingly, breathed easier. The spy network that had infiltrated London, threatening military operations and national security, had been dismantled. The Blitz continued its relentless pounding of rooftops and streets, but Britain's unseen defences had prevailed. Secretly, methodically, the nation's intelligence services had struck back, ensuring that the enemy's shadow would not reach the core of government. In the weeks and months that followed, MI5 officers catalogued every detail, preserving the records in locked archives, labelled top secret, hidden from history for decades. They knew that the public would never hear the full story. The trials, the executions, the betrayals, all remained confined to confidential files. Yet the lives saved and the plans disrupted were tangible victories. And yet, the story of these secret trials is not merely about espionage or victory. It is a story of moral complexity, of men and women making impossible choices in the darkness of war. It is about the burdens carried silently, the justice rendered in shadows, and the sacrifices made to protect countless lives. These trials remind us that war is fought not only on battlefields, but in courtrooms, in intelligence offices, and in the quiet, deliberate decisions made behind closed doors. If this story moved you, if the courage, sacrifice and moral courage of those involved struck a chord, share your thoughts below. Comment on what you think of Britain's secret justice system during the war, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the hidden layers of history, where truth often remains in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. Because the war against espionage may be over, but the lessons of secrecy, sacrifice, and moral complexity echo long after the guns fall silent. The secret trials of London's Nazi spies are gone from public memory, but their impact and the choices made in the shadows endure, waiting for us to remember, to reflect, and to learn.